Ladies and gentlemen, our next event of the evening is a one-fall match with a 60-minute time limit.
What I'd like to have right now,
where the big boys play.
This is where the big boys play, huh?
This is where the big boys play.
Hello everyone, this is Where the Big Boys Play, here for our third episode. I'm here with Chad. How are you doing, Chad?
I'm doing great.
You've just come back from a family trip, so thanks for being able to make it tonight.
Yeah, nice to have a little vacation.
So we are taking a little detour from our route through the NWA pay-per-views, and we're actually going backwards. So Starrcade 84 is going to be next time. Tonight we're going to be looking at NWA Final Conflict. And this needs a little bit of explanation. It's not actually a pay-per-view show. It was just a kind of big, I guess, a big live show in Greensboro, in the Greensboro Coliseum. And I guess up to that date, it was one of the NWA's biggest gates. Is that right, Chad? Would you?
Yeah, I know most of the historians for the Mid-Atlantic and NWA area, such as Bruce Mitchell, talk really fondly of this show, and the tagline is always that there was thousands of seats of people that were turned away that wanted to get into the show but couldn't. And, you could see from the footage we had that the place was absolutely packed all the way up to the last row. So it just seemed like a big, big event for Jim Crockett Promotions.
And I guess before the pay-per-view era, this was really what it was about. This was kind of like basically a super card, a big live show. And this was kind of as big as it got before the Starrcades and the WrestleManias. I should explain that this is not a VHS. This was never released anywhere. We have this footage courtesy of Jim Nelson, also known as Boris Zukov, who basically had the raw tapes, and he made them available some time ago. And this is how we have footage of this show. So thank you, Boris. This also means that the presentation here is kind of strange. It's a little bit unpolished. Things start off without any commentators presenting. There's no announced team. There's no kind of formal start. We're just treated to Dr. Tom Miller in the center of the ring right at the start before the U.S. national anthem comes in. I mean, what was the occasion of this final conflict? As I understand it, there was a big, long feud between Sergeant Slaughter and what's his name again? Don
Knodel.
Yeah, Don Knodel and Jay Youngblood and Ricky Steamboat. And they've been feuding for some time, and it was all going to culminate here in a big cage match.
Yeah, this just seemed like a kind of localized angle that had really caught fire, and this was presented as the blow-off to that feud with all the stipulations and the cage match stipulations, so it just seemed like something that, for whatever reason in the area, that it really captured the imagination of the patrons, and that's why they showed up in full force.
Obviously, I've been reading around this because there's not a huge amount of information available on this show. But from what I've read, this is kind of seen as being quite innovative as well. A big long angle leading off to a big blow off at a big show. It's kind of quite modern in the way that it was booked, in the way that it was promoted. I mean, obviously, there's always been feuds and things, but I think that this was seen as being something reasonably new.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see how much footage exists previous to this, because I personally have not seen anything as far as the build up to this match.
Yeah, there are a couple of kind of old VHSs, again, from Boris Zukov, Jim Nelson.
Right.
There's something called The Road to Greensboro, which shows up.
Yeah, I saw the listing for that, but I'd never seen that tape when I was doing some research.
Yeah, that's what I saw. And I should mention that we're basically doing this show because it was suggested to us by a chap called Al on the Pro Wrestling Only board. So he said we should take a look at this. And given that we're not too far away from 1983, and I was quite interested to see, what another show around this time would have looked like, I thought it'd be an interesting thing to do. And certainly on this card, there's a whole ton of guys that I have never seen before, and likely we're not going to see again. So, quite interesting to see this.
Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you now stand for the playing of our national anthem.
We come out with the national anthem, and the first match is Ken Timms versus Jerry Briscoe. I was surprised that Briscoe was the face here. He was getting quite a loud pop from the crowd, and Ken Timms was the heel. I've never seen Ken Timms before, so I assumed he was a jobber, but apparently not.
I also have never seen him before, so he was new to me too. He seemed sort of like a generic heel, just kind of workman type heel.
Yeah. So I mean, he seemed more like a lower mid carder or even a mid carder, but just judging from the way that this match was booked, he definitely got some offense in here. It wasn't a squash. And the ref is Tommy Young, and I noticed he got some significant heel heat there. He got booed, which is, I guess, an old tradition of booing refs at live shows.
Yeah, I don't know why Tommy was booed here. I know later on when he started shoving down Flair and what have you that he got a pretty good face reaction, but this was the case in all the referees announced tonight. They got a pretty good boovation from the crowd except for Sandy Scott.
And our announcer is Bob Caudle on his own to start off with. And he kind of comes midway through this match. I actually thought, when it started out, I actually thought that we weren't going to get any announcing, but Caudle kind of comes in. And, we get some decent offense from Ken Timms here. Some mat work, and Briscoe gives us a nice double underarm suplex. But this is a pretty short match.
Yeah, they had kind of a little amateur wrestling start where they were exchanging and what have you, and then Tim started working over Briscoe's arm for a little bit and mixed in some fairly basic stuff, and then that only lasted for about 1 or 2 minutes, and Briscoe gained the advantage at a double underhook suplex, locked in the figure four, and got the victory. It was around 5 minutes from start to finish and not much to it.
I mean, it was interesting to see what Briscoe would be like. This is obviously a match where he was going over, and you knew it before it started. But it was interesting to see that they were still that amateur kind of mat work, even within that 5-minute time frame. It's always interesting to see what a guy is like in a context like that.
Yeah, and I thought he was a pretty good face here too. I know with almost all the footage I've seen of him, he's either played it fairly straight as far as his matches in Japan, or he's been a heel. So to kind of see him show a little fire as a babyface here was intriguing.
I got a little note post-match. We get some awesome, because the figure four is the finish, and after the match, Ken Timms carries on selling the leg as he's walking out, and I thought that was great.
I did notice that. That was really good. He was limping going back to the dressing room, which is a nice little touch because, again, this was a show that wasn't meant for widespread consumption. So for him to carry on like that, even after the spotlight was necessarily off him, was very well done.
I was wondering, did this actually go out on TV, or that's what I
was wondering, because you had the commentary, but like you say, and what we'll get into, you had some sort of production notes and cues being talked about and whatnot. So I don't know if they were filming this to show clips.
Yeah.
Kind of like how they did in Memphis, where they'd show the studio footage, or if it was meant to be a full-fledged release or what.
I kind of figured that this would have been shown on World Championship Wrestling, like individual matches, or what's the other show they had, Worldwide?
Right, that's kind of the impression I got.
So yeah, they may show individual matches, but not the whole card was never shown in this form.
Right.
So the next match we have is Rick Harris versus a very young Mike Rotunda.
Yeah.
Mike Rotundo. Rotundo's the face. He's kind of in US Express mode. Well, not even that, even. He's kind of in young, kind of amateur varsity mode here, I'd say.
Yeah, again, as interesting as it was to see Briscoe as a face. It was also interesting to see Rotundo as a face because I'd seen some of his U.S. Express run, but I mostly associate him as IRS. That was the character he was portraying in my childhood. So to see him kind of come out as a spunky baby face and colorful tights and kind of a wild haircut was very interesting to see.
And Rick Harris here, who's playing the heel, he goes on to be Black Bart fairly soon after. In fact, by Starcade 84, he's already Black Bart. Here he is kind of more in I guess this is early in his career. He's almost enhancement talent. I'd have thought Rick Harris at this point. And just before this match starts, Tom Miller shills this Easter show that he keeps on going back to, where the Briscoes are facing Dory Funk Jr. and Paul Jones. That's the big match there. So I guess Paul Jones at this point had not yet become a manager.
Right. It seemed like he still was either not a full-fledged manager, or I don't know if he was managing some and wrestling some, or he had not even managed at all at this time. But yeah, he was. That was one of the two feature matchups they mentioned. So for the Easter card.
Just on the subject of Tom Miller, what do you think of him as a ring announcer? Because I was quite impressed with him during the show.
Yeah, I've always liked his voice. It's definitely a distinctive sound when you hear him sort of shout the ladies and gentlemen. That's kind of an iconic for long-term wrestling fans. You know, you recognize that immediately. And I think he does a good job of, especially when he announces all the contestants for the six-man tag on that Easter show, really kind of building up until you get to Andre the Giant as the big person coming in, and he really showed some enthusiasm but also some professionalism, so I think he does a good job as a ring announcer.
And he sticks around for I think he's still around by 87, but I guess by the time of the Turner takeover he's gone, Miller, right?
Yeah, I don't know if they transitioned straight from him to Capetta. That'll be something interesting to see because I can't remember anybody really bridging the two. Yeah, they might have been, but
it literally goes Miller, Capetta, Michael Buffer, as far as
right,
I know. Yeah, it will be interesting to see who does those 88, 89 shows.
Yeah, that was kind of the area where I don't remember. I kind of remember Miller maybe around the first Clash, though, so that's 1988, but I don't know any beyond that. Of course, I don't know when Capetta started coming in.
Capetta at this time was a WF guy. He was kind of like number two behind the Fink.
Right.
Although he never makes any major shows, but I think he does, house shows and things like that.
Yeah, I've seen him on some Philly Spectrum footage, which is really interesting to see. He looks really baby-faced when he's announcing there.
All right, so as this match starts, Coddle says that Harris has the height and weight advantage here, but then he says that Mike Rotundo is 6'5".
The big man is so tall, about 6'6" or 7", at 265 pounds, is such a big individual. He's got a little height and leverage advantage on Rotundo, even though Rotundo himself goes well over 6 feet, 6'5" or so.
Yeah, this was one of those exaggerations that was pretty humorous because we hear first that Black Bart is around 6'7" or 6'8", and then we hear that Mike Rotundo is around 6'5", which I think was being generous by about 3 or 4 inches in both cases.
Yeah, I immediately went and had a look because there's no way that Rotundo is 6'5". He's actually 6'3", which is.
Oh, okay.
Obviously, I think in general wrestlers are bigger than we think of. Like we always think of, I think of Rotundo as a smaller guy, but obviously if he was standing next to me or you, he'd be pretty big, right?
Yeah, I mean that seems. I know back in this time, I can remember. When I went to shows as a kid, of course, they looked really bigger and larger than life. And I know wrestlers have gotten significantly smaller over the years. But for instance, I went to the Ring of Honor show at WrestleMania weekend last year in Atlanta, and I was just astounded at how small some of the competitors were. For instance, Kyle O'Reilly, he might be 5'6", 5'7", because I'm 6'1", and I towered over him and Adam Cole and a couple of the other wrestlers. So I don't know if it's just everybody's gotten smaller. Convinced I would kind of like to stand toe-to-toe with some of the people back in the day to see how they really do measure up height-wise.
I reckon all of these ROH guys probably grew up with Dean Malenko as a hero, so they thought they could become wrestlers.
I guess so, because he looked like somebody that you could sort of fit in your pocket and take him out with you.
So in this match we get kind of a bunch of nothing offense from Rick Harris, punches, snap pair, headlock, a slam, a leg drop. It was all Harris to start off with, and then out of nowhere Rotunda gets an airplane spin and the match is over. Yeah,
there was nothing to this. Also, you didn't get kind of some of the neat amateur wrestling that the first match gave you. Rotunda, one time, he did use some flash moves, like he dropped to the mat and hit Harris with his 2 feet to kind of flip him off his feet. But most of Harris's offense was just a powerhouse heel, forearm shots, some power moves. The leg drop looked nice, but Rotundo getting the advantage with the airplane spin really came out of nowhere, and then he pinned him.
So after the match, Miller shills this Easter show again, and he announces this big 6-man tag: Greg Valentine, One Man Gang, and Oliver Humperdinck, surprisingly, against our favourite Bugsy McGraw, Jimmy Boogie Woogie Man, who gets a massive pop from the crowd. And then,
Boogie Woogie Man, he got a big pop from the crowd when they announced him.
And then Miller goes absolutely crazy when he announces Andre the Giant, and the crowd go wild.
Fans, again a reminder about that Super Wrestling Spectacular coming right here to the Greensboro Coliseum on Easter Sunday, April the 3rd at 7:30 p.m. On that Super Wrestling card, a special 6-man tag team match will pit Greg Valentine, the One Man Gang, and Sir Oliver Humperdinck against Bugsy McGraw, Jimmy Boogie Woogie Valiant, and Andre the Giant!
Yeah, I kind of have a perverse desire to see that 6-man. Just seems like such a random assortment of really big stars that you can't really think of another time in history where they'd all be in the same place together.
Well, with Bugsy McGraw, One Man Gang, and Jimmy Valiant, that's going to be a work rate classic, that one.
Humperdinck, too, don't forget him. I
didn't even know that Humperdinck ever wrestled, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a match from him, and I don't know what he was looking like physique-wise in 1983, but if it was anything close to his Bam Bam Bigelow managerial days, I kind of shudder the thought.
Just on the subject of Humperdinck, just to go off on a slight tangent here, I have never understood the deal of a face manager. I've never understood, I never got the point of him.
Yeah, I can't think of too many offhand. I don't know, and really in NWA and WCW especially, I can't think of hardly any that were face managers besides some Teddy Long. Would Johnny be bad?
In history, there's probably Paul Bearer, and who was that guy who came in with the Road Warriors during their...
Paul Ellering. Yeah, now that would be an example.
When he had the puppet there at SummerSlam 92, again, totally point. For me, the whole deal of a manager is that they are there to cheat. So there's no point of having a face one. Miss Elizabeth, of course, is the bigger exception.
Right. Yeah, I know I've seen Arnold Scotland help with Bob Backlund. He was the manager for Bob Backlund, and he essentially, in a lot of the Backlund WWF title defenses I've seen, he would actually literally put up a chair right next to ringside and sit in the chair, and that was all he would do. He would come out with him, wave to the crowd when he got announced, sit in the chair for the whole match, and then walk right back. So he served no purpose.
Well, he did have one very famous moment in history where he threw in the towel.
That was the only time I can ever recollect him doing anything in the 5-year run that I've seen of Backlund's title run.
Scarlett was a big Vince office guy, right?
I don't know if they just gave him that role because he wanted to. I know he was one of Vince Senior's and then a little bit of Vince Junior's main backstage men, kind of along with Gorilla Monsoon, but just always seemed strange to me because he would honestly just sit in a chair and just look kind of sternly on at the action. So it was bizarre. But anyway.
I just pulled up Scarlett because I was interested to see how long Scarlett stuck around. And apparently he appeared in the video for Pile Driver.
Oh, really?
By Coco Beware. So he was at least around as late as 1987. And then he was he was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1994. So
yeah. I'm watching the 1994 yearbook set, and he actually comes out on Raw in late 1994 to apologize to Backlund for throwing into the towel and to explain his actions. And Backlund has just started his snapping gimmick, and he snaps and puts him in the chicken wing, and Sparky Plug, of all people, comes out to try to save Scotland. But it's a really great angle, actually. And Scotland looked pretty good. I mean, this was late 1994. I was sort of surprised.
I'm just thinking as if a single person in that Raw crowd in 1994 cared about the Scotland Backlund business back in 84.
That was some long-term history they were revisiting. I cannot imagine somebody today coming out on Raw and talking about an angle that happened in 2002 and wanting some justification for it.
All right, so our third match here is Gene Anderson and Red Dog Lane.
Oh.
This is Jim Nelson, a.k.a. Boris Zukov, who we have to thank for this footage, and Johnny Weaver. And the angle here, actually, is that Jim Nelson was part of Sergeant Slaughter's kind of... Sergeant Slaughter made this claim that he could basically take any two random guys and train them up as privates. And he took Jim Nelson and Don Knodel, and they were both privates. And then at some point, Nelson turned on Slaughter, and he became a face. So that was the kind of angle leading into this. Gene Anderson here looks really old.
Yeah, I made that exact note. He looked decrepit.
He's got a big tummy, and he's. I checked. I worked it out. He would be 50 at this show.
Oh, really? Oh,
so
that explains it.
Yeah, but when was Ric Flair 50? Probably about 10 years ago.
I would guess probably 2002, something around there.
We start off with my least favourite start to any match, the Test of Strength. I hate the Test of Strength. Obviously, it's a staple of 80s wrestling, and many matches started with this. But a match involving these four guys, I don't understand what Test of Strength is doing anywhere near this match. And I've just got the word hate written in big letters on my notes. And really, not a lot happens in this match until Nelson comes in with a hot tag, and he does about 50 slams. And I've said that even if Nelson looks a bit green here, he actually looks okay in this match, surprisingly. Like, better than he would ever look as... I mean, Boris Zukov was basically a jobber, and I've never seen his AWA stuff, but his stuff with the Bolsheviks never looks good to me. And Jim Nelson in this match looked better than I've ever seen him.
Yeah, the Test of Strength here was sort of puzzling. I can kind of understand justifying it if you have two big powerhouses. For instance, I've always enjoyed the Hogan Warrior Test of Strength as kind of a two big powerhouses going at it and colliding. But here you had just four in decent shape wrestlers that did a Test of Strength for a round 2 to 3 minutes of a 7-minute match. It sort of reminded me of the nerve hold in the Kabuki Charlie Brown match we watched in Starrcade, where you have such a short match anyway, and to just fill it with this filler test of strength is really unforgivable. Weaver also, he looked decent, I would say, in the Starrcade match we watched, and here he tried to mix in some comedy with kind of the headbutt. He sort of charged at Red Dog Lane like a dog, and Red Dog retreated to the outside in kind of a little comedy spot, but other than that, he did not show me much here. So I was kind of disappointed in that.
And, Gene Anderson, obviously a big name.
Yeah. This really seemed like the end of the road for him.
Why is he looking for partners? Who the hell is Red Dog Lane is really I spent a while trying to find any information about this guy. And I've got Total Extreme Wrestling 2008, and I've got the Death of the Territories mod on there. And it has never ceased to amaze me how thorough that database is. And literally the most information I could find on Red Dog Lane was in that database. And yeah, he was just a kind of regional wrestler around this time. I don't think he ever kind of did anything of note. But I'm just wondering where Gene Anderson is looking for partners. One of the best tag wrestlers of all time, can't find a better.
Yeah, this is a weird pairing. This match definitely seemed like a showcase for Nelson.
Oh, absolutely. He was the featured wrestler, without doubt.
I'm sorry, do what?
I said he was the featured wrestler, without doubt.
Yeah.
Jim Nelson.
Yeah. It definitely seemed like a showcase for him. Thought maybe we'd see a little more interaction with him and Gene Anderson, but not a lot there. And then he ended up rolling up Lane, so I guess they just used him there to take the pinfall. But it is a strange pairing for him to be with one of the greatest tag wrestlers to history at that point.
Why not do this as a singles match? If the sole purpose of this match is to put Jim Nelson over, why not just have Jim Nelson versus Red Dog Lane? Jobber squash.
That's probably wouldn't have been a bad idea, because what we had here, Weaver was pretty much a non-factor, and Anderson looked just really old. He did not look like a legend or nothing at all. He just looked old and kind of out of place.
And I think that is something to think about. The way, in this day, at this point in 1983, that was kind of it for an old wrestler. They'd wrestled as. I've often thought about this about Ric Flair, where people say, he should really retire, it's time. And obviously Ric Flair should retire now. But I also think that the whole generation of wrestlers that he grew up with all wrestled well into their 50s. Because what else did they have to do? They probably didn't make enough to have a really decent pension. So they just have to keep on going. And as long as they had a name value, they still had to wrestle. And it wasn't like back in the days of NWA that, back in these days, I don't think they didn't talk people up as legends or anything. People just got old and progressively, worked their way down the card until they became, what we see Gene Anderson being here.
Yeah, I would compare the way Anderson looked here to kind of how the Assassin looked in Starrcade. The Assassin in that match, he looked very out of shape and kind of just hanging on to past glory dates. And I know he sort of transitioned into a managerial role and developing talent and whatnot, training. But that is interesting because I guess Gene maybe does have nothing else to fall back on.
Yeah. But, I guess another way of looking at it is that a lot of the wrestlers of the 80s, of say the generation of Hogan and DiBiase and Warrior and all those guys, they probably have, they're very fortunate to have the WE around calling them legends and making sure their product lines are still going and bringing out DVDs and talking them up as legends, because I guess the old 70s stars never had that.
Yeah, I don't recall any mention by Caudle about Anderson's past history in this match. He may have, but it didn't resonate enough for me to make a note on it, so it must have not been too extended if he did mention it.
So we go from this match, and the faces went over there, right? Jim Nelson got the pin.
Yes, yeah, Nelson just rolled up Lane and got the pin in 7 minutes.
So now we go into an interesting little bit where we hear Caudle off mic asking the producer to let him know when David Crockett turns up.
Okay. Yeah, I'll let you know if he comes down. I'll just say, coming in with me now at ringside, David Crockett or something, okay? And then, hey, can you then tell me in the headset, say okay, and let me know that his mic is open when you open it? Good.
And he says, "Can you let me know when he gets here, okay?"
Which is kind of interesting because in the next match, David just sort of arises out of nowhere. He kind of hops into the booth and just starts. The way Caudle was talking here, you thought you might get an introduction or kind of a segment where he introduces David, but no. In the next match, when David arrives, he just sort of picks up a headset and starts going to town.
Yeah, I haven't missed it because I was trying to listen out for when he'd come in, but it just kind of happened, and
yeah.
So
yeah, Caudle just says David Crockett's in the booth, and then David's going, 80 miles an hour talking about the match.
So Tom Miller shows this Easter show again. And,
yes.
The crowd pops for Andre again. And I really want to watch this Easter show, and I can't find it anywhere. So.
I do. It does sound like, especially that 6-man. And I thought it was interesting that they took an intermission right here, which all the information I can find on this card was that the 5 matches that we see plus the Valentine Flair match was the entire card. So we've had 3 matches. One went 5 minutes, one went about 5.5 minutes, and then the tag match went 7 minutes. So you take an intermission after like 30 minutes of action, which I thought was real bizarre.
It's kind of an eye-opener to see what, just a general, this was a big show at this time, and it's still kind of like, there's a lot of nothing matches on the card. So
yeah, I mean, these 3 sort of were showcases for some individuals, and you sort of had, Jerry Briscoe gets a little showcase, Mike Rotundo's an up-and-coming spunky baby face, and then Jim Nelson, so you could kind of see what their intentions were with each of the matches, but they really weren't too all competitive, and sort of seemed like your standard superstars squash matches in a lot of ways.
Yeah, they wouldn't look out of place on an MSG house show or even just like a generic superstars match, something like that. You're
exactly.
Right. So anyway, Playboy Gary Hart is out, and this was a really weird moment. He calls out Dick Slater, who he manages, but he calls him out in such a way that's I thought he was calling him out. I thought that Gary Hart was against Dick Slater here, but he isn't.
Dickie Slater, bring it on down, baby! Bring it on down, Richard, let's go!
Slater's the heel, and he's here to face Roddy Piper for the TV title. Yeah, I was a little bit confused by this start. It was just a bit weird. I didn't really understand what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, Gary kind of comes out and he's yelling, "Come on out, Richard," which I thought it was funny. I'd never heard Dick Slater called Richard, and it was kind of nonchalant. And one thing I wanted to talk about is Gary Hart is known as Playboy Gary Hart, which I don't understand based on his demeanor and what we see of him, how he got the Playboy nickname. It seems like kind of one of the most misplaced nicknames in wrestling that I could think of, that he would be considered Playboy Gary Hart. The only other one I could think of right offhand was Beautiful Bobby Eaton, which of course I don't think anybody could say that Bobby Eaton was a beautiful man, but this too.
You're absolutely right, Playboy Gary Hart.
Yeah, it just seems, because he doesn't have a demeanor of a playboy. I mean, of course, when I picture Playboy, I think of Hugh Hefner. Kind of get that image in my head, but Gary Hart's about as far from that as possible. With kind of in both shows we've seen him in, he's sort of been wearing a dark colored suit and a kind of grim demeanor with his bald head.
He's very cerebral. Like, he'd probably be like, if he was called the Brain Gary Hart or something like that, that would make more sense to me.
Yeah, I don't know, or even just. I have no idea. Just Playboy does not fit. I don't know if there's a backstory from the 70s or from his wrestling days.
Didn't Buddy Rose also go by that name? Playboy Buddy Rose?
Yes, now that is a good point. But at least with Buddy, even though he was certainly not a Adonis-looking man, as far as his physique, he did kind of present himself with a Playboy image, with the robes and sort of the flamboyance. So I can sort of see that more than here, even though the looks didn't match up to the nickname.
Okay, so we get a lot of, I've got a note here, great headband for Dick Slater. He's good.
Yeah. And Dick was getting some great heat coming out. The crowd, he did a long walk around the whole ring, and you had the people shouting at him and pointing at him. He was getting some great heat.
I'm surprised that Dick Slater is not, didn't have a better career. Like, I know he had a pretty decent career, but like, he could have been a lot bigger than he was. Dick Slater.
Yeah, I don't know if he sort of just got lost in the shuffle, kind of being in Florida predominantly, but I would have loved to have seen him, for instance, challenge Hogan around this time, and I think he could have done some great work with Hogan in 84 and 85, just using his size and his agility to kind of bounce around for that.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering what happened, because, I mean, he was great on every match I saw him on the All Japan set.
Yeah.
Around 80, 81, 82, he was great. He's been impressive every time I've seen him so far, going through these NWA shows. And he did actually go to WF in 86, 87. I've just pulled it up here. And he had a match with Jake Roberts as a Southern Rebel gimmick he was given.
I wonder if that's any good. I know his matches, I've seen some of his stuff in Mid-South. Have you ever seen his stuff in Mid-South? He was very good in that also.
Yeah, I've seen a few of, in fact, around the time that I stopped watching that Mid-South set, 85, I watched a couple of Slater matches. Yeah, but Slater's a guy I want to see a lot more of in general, but it's just strange how he never, because I watched quite a bit of early 90s WCW, and he crops up there.
I know he's sort of teaming with Bunkhouse Buck even in, what is that, like 1995.
Yeah, they get the tag titles under Colonel Parker.
Right.
But he's a completely different shape by that point. Different style, a much more a brawler than this. I mean, at this point, he's much more technical. He's a quite smooth, scientific heel. I mean, he still does some of the Terry Funk moves, but as far as the style of match he works, he's pretty much a technical heel in my book.
Yeah, with this match, it started out where actually Slater was kind of being held back by Gary Hart, and then he shrugged him off, which got a pop from the crowd. And Slater had this towel that he wrapped around Piper, and Piper sort of slung out of the towel and then wrapped it around Slater, which got another great big pop from the crowd. And it was at this point that David jumped in on the commentary team. And go ahead.
I've just got a note here. Crockett just adds noise and excitement and energy, and he's just a total loon.
Yeah, I know we talked about Crockett last show, and we were kind of disappointed that it didn't seem like he'd be popping up on any of the shows going forward they were reviewing. So this was a nice treat to get him here because in this match he was really good, and in the main event, which we'll get to, I thought he was fantastic and really added a lot to that match.
Whips him across into the ropes. He tried for the fifth. Piper comes back hard right.
Roddy Piper ducked right under that blow, and he's landed a couple of buttes.
Now Buckman slinging it out. Slater now running.
Goes over the rope.
Well, one thing, getting back to this match that I really liked was Slater, in the early going, he sort of jumped over the top rope and exited through the crowd, retreating, and that kind of was interesting because then they claimed that Piper threw him over the top rope, so that I thought was a pretty good spot. That was interesting. And then Fargo did actually the Tommy Young 2 Ric Flair spot where Gary Hart was arguing on the apron and Sonny Fargo shoved him down. So he was taking some punishment this match, Gary Hart.
I got a note here just saying that Slater was an awesome cowardly heel. Like, he seemed to be able to do it all. Like, he can brawl, he can do your technical moves, and he can also do this kind of Memphis stuff where he's begging off and, you know.
Yeah.
I really like he's a revelation for me, Slater. Like, he seems to be a total package as a heel. Action's a little slow here, I thought. We get a lot of strikes, and in many ways this is typical Piper. Very scrappy, very kind of like stop-start, a lot of stalling, working the crowd.
Yeah, when Slater would get the advantage, one thing about this match that I liked this match. I thought it was a good match, but it did drag out too long. It was 17 minutes, and there was a lot of kind of rinse and repeat where they'd be going toe-to-toe and brawling with good shots or some kind of nasty headbutts, actually. But then Piper would just overcome Slater, take over the advantage, and take him down for a second or two, and then we'd sort of get back up and redo it all over again. So that got repetitive towards the end. I thought Slater did a pretty good job. I think the thing with Piper's offense is to take it, you kind of have to match his intensity and, like you said, scrappiness. That was a very good adjective to describe the way he kind of brawls. And I thought Slater did pretty good here by doing that and also trying to take some big bumps off of Piper.
But Piper does a quite nasty... I've got it written here as a nose twist stomp.
Yes, that looked kind of brutal where he took the bottom of his boot and scraped it across Slater's nose and mouth, which I've seen numerous times, but here it actually looked like it was hurt, where sometimes you see it where it looks like somebody's trying to do like a spin move on the person's forehead. Here it actually looked like he sort of grinded Slater's nose.
We'll actually see that spot again in a Slater match at Starrcade 84, and I've just realized that Slater does that move, so maybe he picked it up from maybe.
Yeah, he also I know he did his kind of trademark trying to fly into the corner spot, which he does in a lot of his matches here. That was another kind of trademark Slater spot that he mixed in.
Piper actually surprised me with some of his offense here. He hits a suplex, and he actually does a Rick Rude style neckbreaker.
Yeah, that looked awesome. Yeah. That looked very good.
Really good. And yeah, I mean Piper can turn it on occasion. Like there's the Bret Hart match, of course. But like he can, like it's not like he's a total brawler. He can do moves if required.
Yeah, I've seen some Piper in Portland in the early 80s, and to me, what we've seen so far from his two matches here in Mid-Atlantic and NWA, it's kind of the same type mold where he does need somebody to match him to where if he's just dominating, it can be sort of out of control and helter-skelter, but as long as somebody is there to match him or rein him in, it really produces a great match because he brings the intensity. He can mix up some wrestling or some impressive maneuvers like the reverse neck breaker we saw here. He just needs somebody else to kind of take him along for the ride also.
So Gary Hart is a constant distraction for the ref.
Yeah,
in this match.
it sort of plays into the ending of the match, but for a while here, I thought Gary was a pretty big distraction in this match as far as just he had to jump up on the apron probably 10 times, and it was with no consequence. Piper was ignoring him. Slater wasn't able to gain any sort of advantage by him doing that. We just had Fargo sort of admonishing him, and then that was it. And that kind of also got into the rinse and repeat repetitive nature that drug this match down a little bit.
Yeah, so I really like the, I guess you call it the stretch sequence when Slater was in control. It gives him a gut wrench suplex and a headbutt.
Yeah, that was a nice suplex.
Really nice elbow drop. Like, Slater's really smooth, everything he does. But then when Piper gets back in control, he gets a pin, Hart distracts him, and then Slater goes down for an absolute age, and all Piper gives him is a diving fist, and like Slater's out for the count. I don't really understand this finish. And Piper gets the pin. It's like, I mean, I'm still trying to adjust to this. I know you mentioned it last time where basically we don't get any finishes. Like, the finish is just, the match just ends. You know, the pin comes out of the blue.
Yeah.
And for me, Piper just hadn't done enough to Slater to put him out here. Like, I didn't believe, it really hurt the match. Slater had given Piper a lot more punishment, so why would Slater go down, you know, after just one diving fist? It didn't make any sense.
This came after a restart too, where finally, after, you know, Piper ignoring Hart, he finally goes after him, which allows Slater to gain the advantage, and then he hurls Piper over the top rope and then suplexes him back in the ring and pins him. But Piper had his foot on the ropes, which, usually when you see a match restart, you have another referee or somebody else to kind of come down to explain what had happened. Here, I guess Fargo just took Piper's word for it because he immediately restarts the match, and that's, like you said, we had kind of a out of the blue finish where Hart and Fargo are arguing with each other. Piper sort of catches Slater coming off the ropes and then pins him with a big fist. It wasn't, again, the Valentine match I know you thought had sort of an abrupt finish.
Yeah.
This, I think, was definitely more abrupt this time. And hurt the match. I was sort of fine with the Valentine finish. This did seem a little weird so closely after the restart. But
I think this is going to be a recurring theme for us, and it's kind of made me appreciate Pat Patterson a lot more watching these early shows from 83 and 84, because so many matches have crap finishes on a lot of these shows, and it just makes, like, Patterson's famous for being a great finish guy, right? And
yes,
that's one thing those WF shows all have is, I hesitate to say all of them, but is memorable finishes, you know, or where you can see that, you know, the match is going to end now, and it's kind of like a flourish at the end. And for me, like, very few of these matches have had that. Even end of Race Flair didn't really have, you know, a big. It was, you know, more of a mess with the ref involvement.
Yeah, I think it may be more of a kind of finisher type deal, where with the WWL, finishers are so important to where when somebody, you know, hits their finisher that's been established, you anticipate that the match is either going to be over or you're going to have a really big dramatic kick out. Whereas I know, just thinking back to a lot of the NWA, WCW title changes even, you have a lot of kind of sunset flips, inside cradle type roll-ups that end big matches. But I guess just a difference of style.
But there's also, like, on more than one occasion, and I think we'll see this a lot on the next show when we do Starrcade 84, the announcers don't seem to be in, like, they don't seem to know what's happening, and they're as confused as we are. And that's something that, like, we'd never get on a Vince show. Like, you never get a point where, you know, Monsoon thinks it's one finish, but it's actually a different finish. but yet it seems to happen quite often during these shows. And yeah, I mean, this bullshit finish hurt the match a little bit for me because Piper gets the pin, but because the match went 17 minutes, Slater retains the TV title. So yeah, we get that finish. That's kind of the Dusty finish before the Dusty finish, right? Before the Dusty finish, there was the match has gone 17 minutes. So
yeah, this seems to. I'm sure as we go on through the shows with the television title, we'll have a bevy of either matches of this type where the person goes over, but not in the amount of time the belt is on the line, or when we get towards the 90s, I know there's a lot of 15-minute draws and what have you when dealing with the television title.
Okay, so I mean that was a decent match, I'd say.
Yeah, I thought it was good. I actually enjoyed that. I would say that was good. Good match.
And Piper's gone now, right? I think he shortly after, not long after this. Well, this was before Starrcade.
Yeah, yes. So shortly after Starrcade is when he makes the jump. And
yeah, Vince was. In fact, I've been reading the 1984 Wrestling Observers, and it's quite interesting to see Meltzer document, Vince's acquisition of talent over this time. And he talks about, he gets Hogan, he gets Piper, and then he goes around all the different territories taking various different stars, and it's quite interesting to see him speculate, to see how, obviously he didn't know at that point that it was, that he was going to take over. So they were trying to size up how all the different territories were going to compete and what was going to happen, And he kind of goes through different towns. He basically says that all the towns that Vince takes are towns that were kind of dead already, they were there for the taking, and that he hadn't actually gone head to head with anyone with a popular promotion. So he mentions like Dallas, for example. Those fans were loyal to the Von Erichs, so there was no chance of Vince coming in to take that. That was it was just interesting to see what the kind of perception was there in 1984 from the smart fans. So we already at our main event. It's Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood versus Canodal and Slaughter in a cage, and we get the Rocky music to start.
Yeah, for the heels.
So
I would assume.
Yeah, we don't get the light show, I don't think, but we do get a long playing of the Rocky music. And Steamboat does something really interesting here. He kind of tightrope walks on the top rope. Did you see him do that?
Yeah, I guess and that was when Kernerdle and Slaughter were coming out. He does sort of, I don't know if that was showcasing his agility, testing the ropes, or quite what was going on there, but that was kind of interesting.
And the ref here is Sandy Scott.
Yeah.
Who's a former wrestler.
And he, we'll maybe get into this a little bit more in the ending, but as anybody that listened to the Starrcade 83 show knows, I had a pretty deep hatred of Gene Knitsky in that match, and while Sandy Scott, I don't think, did as terrible a job as Knitsky did in that match, I certainly did not think he did a very good job here, and had some problems with the way he officiated this match as well.
Yeah, well, maybe after Starrcade 84 we can do a kind of bottom three guest refs thing, because we have Smoking Joe Fraser to look forward to as well.
Oh my gosh, there's some pretty steep competition in these early shows with the. And I guess I just don't understand sort of why they did this again with Sandy Scott and with Knitsky. I mean, they sort of present it as you've got to have the old style wrestler to come in to enforce the rules, but in a cage match, where they emphasize there's no disqualification, it just seems like, well, let the wrestlers go at it and do their thing instead of trying to hold them back.
So I did a little bit of reading about Sandy Scott just to see, what his deal was. And he's kind of like the Crockett version of Arlen Scarland. Like he was kind of a back office guy, been around for a long time. And his brother is actually George Scott, the legendary booker, and who was probably with Vince at this time. He would have been, I think, up until '84. George Scott is there. So obviously they wheeled him out to ref this match. There's an interesting stipulation here that if Steamboat and Youngblood lose, they can never tag again.
Yeah, that was for a relatively young babyface team. That seemed like sort of a kind of bizarre stipulation, but it's sort of the way the match is presented and the way they wrestle the match. They really sort of got over the magnitude of that.
They were already 4-time champs at this point. Which is, yeah. I mean, Jay Youngblood, I thought, he obviously, I think, died prematurely, right? But
yes.
he could have been a big, looking at him in this match and the last match, he could have been a big star, I guess. He could have been. And, there's an argument to say that he'd already achieved some level of stardom, being a 4-time NWA tag champ, right?
Yeah, I guess Steamboat was 30 years old when this match happened, which I would have thought he'd have been younger than that. But I just looked it up, and he was 30, and Youngblood was 28. So they 27, 28. He was born in 1955, so they were, not fresh baby faces. They'd been established and been in the business for a while. On Jay Youngblood, it says his debut was 1975.
I guess most wrestlers peak when they're, in real sports, as it were. Most people peak when they're kind of, like a soccer player or a footballer peaks when they're 26, 27, 28. That's their kind of peak time. But in wrestling, because of politics and whatnot, usually guys don't peak until they're more like 35. They don't get their big main event run until they've been around for at least 15 years, something like that.
Right.
So even though Steamboat's 30, he's still kind of considered quite a young guy, bizarrely. So, yeah, there's a very odd moment at the start of this match where Don Knodel kind of fondles the belt and looks at it lovingly.
Yeah. He also had a homemade T-shirt, which was, I thought, a nice touch.
And Caudle seems a lot more alive with David around. Crockett was such a mark for the product that his enthusiasm must have been infectious. I don't think Caudle could help but be more energized with him around. Yeah, and I actually think on the Starcade shows he's really missed Crockett. Hearing him here, this feels like a massively bigger deal because he's around.
Yeah, I know in the early going, David talks about the cage match and how every wrestler hates wrestling a cage match, and I thought that was really great in getting over the psychology that was being presented. Because I guess we can go ahead and start talking about the structure of the match. The first 15 minutes of this match is essentially Steamboat and Youngblood working over Knodel, which I know this match has a huge reputation, and a lot of people that I respect on the internet wrestling community really present this as one of the true classics. And I know I've watched this match once before and really enjoyed it. But here I did sort of have a problem with this first 15 minutes. I didn't think it was bad necessarily, but I did think, one, that both Steamboat and Youngblood were too technical in their offense, as far as we had essentially a headlock and a chin lock, and then every once in a while they do some flashy moves with a Steamboat with a big chop off the top rope, or Youngblood with a suplex or drop kick or whatnot, but then they'd go right back to the headlock. And you do sort of, I know I was critical of that in the Flair race cage match because I thought they didn't emphasize the cage. That was not the case here because in the first 30 seconds of the match, you can really tell that Kernodle and Slaughter's strategy is going to be to ram either Youngblood or Steamboat into the cage.
Yeah, definitely.
But it did seem after a while, up to the 10, 11, 12-minute mark, I was kind of ready for them to take over on offense because we'd seen just Steamboat and Youngblood dominate up to this time, and it seemed like really too long of a heel in peril segment.
I share that frustration, and I mean, Youngblood and Steamboat's offense basically consists of headlock takedown, headlock, maybe a chop, but basically they go back to the headlock, and I've got written here, this is a 15-minute headlock. It's a good headlock, but it's still a headlock. And there's something I don't really understand about the heel in peril segment. It doesn't make any sense to me because you can't really hot tag to a heel. And it's something that, I mean, we'll see it whenever we see the Russians, for example, where pretty much every match has Ivan Koloff getting beat down by the faces until he gets a hot tag to Nikita, who comes and dominates. And here they were doing that with Slaughter. It just didn't make, like, what's the idea? What is the basic kind of booking idea of having a heel in peril?
Yeah, it does seem, I can understand sort of a shine segment in the beginning, and I enjoy that for a few minutes, but in referencing the 1994 yearbook again, there's a Heavenly Bodies Rock and Roll Express Iron Man match on that set, and that heel in peril segment, kind of similar to this one, is, upwards of 10 minutes long. And it just really seems too drawn out, and you can't sustain the interest and the heat because you're not getting much of a story created so far.
And there's one other thing that I don't understand, because obviously, I mean, Kernodle can't catch a break here in this first 15 minutes. Any attempt at a comeback or anything that he does is, cut short. He gets his neck cranked, basically, whenever he tries to do anything. But they make a point of saying that anything goes in this match. It's a cage match. You can't be DQ'd. But yet, the referee, Sandy Scott, very officiously makes sure that Slaughter doesn't get, like, I don't really understand the point of an anything goes cage match where there's no DQs, but yet you still have to tag in and tag out. I mean, that makes no sense to me at all.
Yeah, I seem to remember this kind of being just a way that NWA sort of structures their cage matches. I know the Anderson Rock and Roll Express cage match from Starrcade is sort of presented in a similar manner where you have one member of each team just standing on the ropes, kind of waiting on the tag on the apron. And I personally don't like it. I think as much as you can criticize the WWF style cage match for the escape rules, I think this is a flaw in their match, because if you do want to present something as everything goes, and in this match the stakes were so high, why not just let Slaughter, come in and save his teammate?
But if I was Slaughter, I'd be saying to Sandy Scott, well, listen, maggot, okay, what are you going to do? Disqualify me?
Right. No, it seems like he could just punch Sandy Scott and just go do basically whatever he wanted.
So anyway, I've got a note here that we have some great chops from Steamer around the time where the match starts heating up, and finally we get a back suplex from Kernodle, and he gets a blind tag into Slaughter. Slaughter comes in and almost immediately starts getting beaten up by Jay Youngblood. So the heels just can't get any offense at all in this match.
Oh. And Slaughter did take some great bumps. I thought that was kind of an interesting spot where Slaughter does get essentially a hot tag after 13 minutes of Kernodle being dominated. Comes in, immediately gets thrown into the cage, which this is the first time anybody's been thrown into the cage so far in the match, and takes a great bump off of that.
And then back to the headlock, this time on Slaughter, and I've just got a note here saying, now you have another heel in peril section, and it just happens way too soon. I mean, Slaughter comes in and almost immediately is on the back foot, and immediately now he's in trouble. So it's like we've had 15 minutes plus now of all faces being on offense, and now the faces are back. Like, heels have got nothing so far. I mean, they're really being Steamboat and Youngblood are double teaming Slaughter. They keep on headlocking him, and then finally Slaughter gets a moment where he rams Youngblood into the cage.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we still have the storyline of Slaughter and Kernodle really going for the big shot or the home run, so to speak, whereas both Steamboat and Youngblood are kind of grinding it out, breaking them down piece by piece and wrestling them. But it really did feel like, in my case at least, that the match turned around significantly once Slaughter rammed Youngblood into the cage.
Yeah, and really from then on, this match does heat up a little bit. And I should mention that Don Kernodle by this point is just an absolute bloody mess. Like, he just looks done. Like, he's, he looks like he's been through a war by this point.
Yeah, he does a great job, and really all of them doing the in layers, but, Kernodle did get worked over for 13 minutes, even though it wasn't the most exciting moveset in the world and a lot of headlocks and whatnot, but he does do a lot of staggering, a lot of falling down and whatnot, and that is nice to see, because I do think too often somebody will get worked over for an extended amount of time, go outside on the ring apron, and then 1 minute later, it's come flying in, running the ring ropes and what have you.
Yeah, I agree with that. I hate to see that as well. But yeah, this was a good selling job in general. But this is probably the match of Kernodle's life, I'd imagine. And then we get a pretty good face in peril section where Youngblood eats a stun gun, fist drop, a neck breaker, and Slaughter gets the Cobra Clutch on. But then he gets hit into the cage, and Steamboat gets a hot tag.
Yeah, and Slaughter did a really obvious blade job when he got rammed into the cage. Again, I don't know how much they thought was being filmed or what have you, but this was one of the more obvious blade jobs you'll see, where he just took his hand and slided it right across his forehead as he was going to the mat.
And by this point, all four guys have got the Crimson Mask. All four
right.
guys are bloody.
And how many times have you seen Steamboat blade before? Because that was one thing I made a note on. They showed a close-up of him bleeding, and I could not think right offhand of any time I've ever seen him blade before this.
That's a good point, actually. Especially, you're right. I can't think of any matches where Steamboat.
I just thought that was striking. I mean, he had a pretty. I mean, Kernodle. They also do a close-up of him, and he is a mess. And absolutely 5-alarm job he did. And Slaughter has always been, I think, a really good bleeder, as far as I can remember in like the Hogan matches and whatnot. And here he looked fine. But Steamboat, I mean, it wasn't. The blood looked good on Steamboat and was flowing, and I just thought right offhand, I was like, well, that's interesting, because I cannot think of another time where he did blade.
Well, I guess a lot of Steamboat's matches are kind of technical affairs, aren't they? A lot of the Steamboat matches. Yeah,
that was one thing I was wanting to see here, is how much fire he showed, because I know that is a criticism that I validate as far as the Randy Savage Steamboat matches. You have essentially this blood feud, and then they go in and have a catch-as-catch-can wrestling match at WrestleMania 3. So that was one thing that I thought in the first part of the match, Steamboat sort of didn't do great at, as far as showing some fire. But in the second part of the match, I thought he was really good at just stiff chops, and kind of going toe-to-toe with Slaughter and Knurtle, and then throwing them into the cage.
His chops, I have to say, are probably among the best chops ever.
Yeah, they look brutal. They really laid it in this match as far as both the chops and the strikes.
Real stuff.
And when they threw each other into the cage, there was a lot of they would sort of launch themselves at the cage.
So around this time, there was a couple of really cool spots. There was one where Steamboat was kind of closing in for the kill on Knodel, and Slaughter dives to save him.
Yes, that was amazing. Steamboat he was going in to, I guess, a flying press against the cage or what have you for Knurtle, and Slaughter essentially tackled Knurtle to where Steamboat just dived headfirst into the cage, and it looked great. I mean, it was just a split second either way, and it would have looked really bad, but the way they did that, it looked amazing, and Steamboat really just took the cage face first.
And there's an amazing selling job from Steamboat here, where he hits the cage and then basically does that 360 over, where he kind of lands on his head and does, complete 360.
He flips essentially completely over to where, I think that was off a clothesline, wasn't it? Or was it off of this?
I've got it from the cage here, but...
Okay, I know there was a clothesline spot, too, where, he'll fall, and if you think about when somebody takes a bump off the clothesline, they take it right on their back, but Steamboat, he'll flip all the way over to where he ends up on his stomach.
Yeah, I love those sort of bumps. I mean, the classic one is, DiBiase's got a great bump that he takes like that, where he flips right over. But this was an awesome one from
there was some really stiff clotheslines thrown out between Slaughter and Knurtle also in this match.
So we get a double power slam, and then really unexpectedly we get a genuine, honest to God, holy shit moment, because Slaughter goes on the top of the cage, and I've just got, oh my God, mega bump, because he dives completely from the top of the cage. And he essentially does a belly flop onto nowhere.
I think this may be one of the best spots I've ever seen as far as the way it looked, because Steamboat escaped. As great as Slaughter, barely saving Knurtle was timing-wise, this was just as good as Steamboat. I mean, he moved 1 second early enough to miss Slaughter, who just, really sold it all the way on the way down. You did not see any kind of landing on the feet or sort of bracing for a bump from Slaughter. He just took this, like he was hitting it. And David Crockett, with this bump was absolutely amazing, where, Slaughter starts getting on top of the ropes and David, goes no, and then he climbs up to the top of the cage, and we get a little more anxious no, and then as soon as Slaughter dives off the cage, David just lets it fly, yelling, as high as he can, no, at the top of his lungs.
He's going to get on the fence. No! Slaughter now trying to get up on top of the fence, David. No! And Steamboat just managed to roll away in the nick of time. David, I would have been from about 10 feet high in the air. He would have crushed him with all that weight.
He would have.
And they're all a mess.
Which was just amazing. This was one of my favorite spots I've ever seen in a match.
Yeah, and completely unexpected. I just didn't see that coming. People talk about that snooker spot, but this was just like, wow. And I tell you what, if Slaughter hit that, Steamboat was dead right there.
Yeah, I mean, it was... you have to hand it to Slaughter, because, again, he full-fledged, dove off of that cage. There was no bracing, there was no... I mean, if you watch, it looks like he's going to hit it, except at the very last second.
Someone should show this to a Jeff Hardy fan, maybe.
Yeah, it was incredible.
So now Jay Youngblood's on fire all of a sudden, and he hits a bunch of chops, double a suplex. We get double chops on Canodal. And then we get that spot from Starcade again, where we get a gorilla press. Steamboat gorilla presses Youngblood onto Slaughter.
Right, and the announcer said that is how they won the tag title. So I guess this was essentially their finishing move, which I didn't know. I've not seen very much of Steamboat and Youngblood as a team, but that was something that I caught that they mentioned it.
And now the faces are really dominant now. There's a double catapult into the cage, which is a pretty cool spot.
Yeah, Slaughter also took a bump too, where he kind of went backwards into the cage. I thought Slaughter was really amazing in this match, and really showed how great he was as sort of a bigger heel, but somebody that could really bump with the best of them, take some big bumps and dives and what have you.
And I actually think Slaughter may be the king of the gimmick match of this kind of time frame. I mean, there's obviously the legendary match with Iron Sheik.
Yeah. I mean that boot camp match is incredible, and he was really incredible in this match also.
I'm looking forward to seeing more Slaughter on the AWA sound.
Yes, me too.
So then Youngblood gets the Cobra Clutch on Canodal, which is a little bit cheeky, and rather than count the pin, the ref pushes Sarge, which I didn't really understand.
Yeah, we had a kind of Cobra Clutch sleeper combo that was put on, and then Slaughter was let go of by Steamboat, and he loaded his elbow pad to deliver the clothesline. But Sandy Scott was out of position. He kind of got knocked over, and then so Slaughter hits it and puts Canodal on top of Youngblood. But then Scott sends Slaughter back to the corner, which was really frustrating because again, it's a no DQ match. So what if he's in the ring? Count the pinfall. But while he's doing that, Steamboat replaces Youngblood and puts him on top of Canodal. So basically, you have two lifeless people pinning each other. Yeah. And then Scott turns around and counts 1, 2, 3, and Steamboat and Youngblood win the tag titles. I thought that was sort of a cheapened finish in some way.
So yeah, I mean, the finish wasn't great, but it was probably better than most finishes that we've seen so far.
Yeah, I would just love to have seen something maybe necessarily once Slaughter dove off the top rope, and he was really wounded there and sold it where he was wounded, where he was staggering around, and Canodal was in trouble and was getting pinned, and he couldn't even break up the pins because he had no energy. I'd have liked to have seen something where Steamboat got the hot tag right after the missed dive. Youngblood takes care of Canodal, and then they do some type of, whether they want to do their power slam on top of Slaughter or dive off the top rope or what have you, just something along that line. Because it did seem like Slaughter was on the way out here, so, I don't know why they couldn't have had him lose cleanly for once.
I'm a little bit confused about the timeline with Slaughter, because he seemed to have been working for AWA around this time, and for Vince. I don't really understand, he must have been, transitions from Slaughter from company to company must have been, either he was working for both at the same time, or it must have been like bang, bang, bang. Because, isn't that Boot Camp match in 1983 as well? Or was it in 82?
I think it's 84, I thought. Maybe it is 83, I'm not positive. But yeah, it does seem like he was bouncing around a good bit between the three major companies at this time.
He was definitely working for Vince in the early 80s. There's definitely shows, he was around when Backlund was around, without doubt. And I think he goes from WF to AWA around the time of the G.I. Joe thing. So I'm just trying to work out when he was working for Crockett, I guess he must have gone from WF to Crockett back to WF.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but this did seem in a lot of ways like a farewell. So that's why I would have liked to seen him kind of take the pinfall. For instance, we did see Kernerdle give that interview at Starrcade 83.
Yeah, Slaughter was gone by the time of Starrcade.
Right.
So this has obviously got a legendary rep as a match. You know, it's been talked about for decades now as being a great match that people hold up. And I mean, obviously on any kind of cage matches comp, this would be on there, right? You'd have to include it. But I wonder whether it is the kind of all-time classic that it's made out to be. I mean, the first 15 minutes do hurt it somewhat for me. I mean, it is a 15-minute headlock there, and the question is, does all of the stuff that happens after that do enough to, allow us to forgive that slow opening?
Yeah, I would. I mean, for instance, in what we've seen so far, I would put this behind the Valentine Piper dog collar match for me personally.
Yeah.
When I saw this the first time, I think I liked it more. I mean, to be honest, I think Steamboat is a lot to deal with that as far as. I just want to say I think Steamboat is a great wrestler and had a great career, but Steamboat is someone that I would have thought when I first started getting onto wrestling communities and what have you that I know there was a lot of greatest of all time kind of hype thrown his way and stuff like that, as where I've watched more footage, I would back down from that, and where I wouldn't even say he is a contender for the greatest wrestler of all time in my book. And here, the first 15 minutes, while I could understand the story they were telling, I thought it was too slow. The Hill in Peril segment was too drawn out, and that really detracted it from being a truly classic match in the upper echelon of the other NWA classics.
Yeah, I mean, we'll obviously be seeing a lot more Steamboat, but it's interesting to hear you say that, because he was one guy who had a very poor showing on the All Japan set there. I mean, I think he probably had maybe 3 or 4 matches in the bottom 5 for most people. Like, and I'm not saying they're all his fault, but I've seen probably as many bad Steamboat matches as I've seen good ones.
Yeah, that's a lot of the All Japan footage was what I was basing that on. Just going in through once again the 1994 yearbook. I mean, he had some really good performances as far as with Steve Austin and the kind of curtain call matches with Flair. But then he also had some disappointing ones. For instance, him and Austin had a showcase match at Bash at the Beach that was really not very good at all, and I blame Steamboat for a lot of that. And I just think a lot of that has to deal with my taste in wrestling, where I've kind of moved on from he does really impressive arm drags and whatnot, and I want a little more fire out of my wrestlers. But yeah, that will be interesting as we go along, just to see, in the 80s NWA stuff, how Steamboat looks in that.
He doesn't have, I mean, I'm not going to say I'm a guy for moves, but I like to see at least a variety of offense. And for me, apart from his chops and his arm drags and his headlock takedown, Steamboat doesn't actually do a lot when it comes to, obviously he's, one of the best sellers ever, but he doesn't actually have that many kind of moves that he does. I mean, it does make a lot of his offense a little bit samey, and
right.
The kind of Heel in Peril segment for me would have been a lot easier to take if they'd done more stuff,
Yeah, I mean, again, it'll be very interesting to see, like, for instance, the Flair Steamboat 89 series I've not seen. in a while. And I know those matches, especially the Clash matches, is dominated by a headlock because it's a 55-minute match.
Yeah.
And I do know there was a lot of kind of action going on with that, where people were moving around, a lot of moving parts. Here, I would say the headlock, it wasn't them just sort of sitting on the mat, but I did think it did detract from the match because it did seem like they were just kind of resulting back to this basic hold in such an important match, and it seemed like sort of an odd strategy that, they did show more success when they started slamming Kernerdle and Slaughter into the cage and given more intensified chops and what have you.
I guess you could justify it by saying that these guys are so wholesome, they're so goody two shoes that that's what they know how to do. That they're gonna, like, even in a heated blood feud cage match, they're gonna be going to the amateur style and doing what they've learned how to do because that's how good they are. They're not rule breakers. It's not in their DNA to use the cage, except
right.
That's the only way I can think of justifying it.
Yeah, I understand that strategy, and I can see how that would work for some people. I would just say, me personally, when you're talking, and that's to take nothing away from this match. I would classify this match as great. If they, when we get to the Death Valley Driver 80s Crockett project, I could see this match going, relatively high. It's just I can see some people thinking this match is a possible number 1 contender, and I don't see that at all. I would actually be surprised if this would be in my top 10 or 15.
Yeah, I'd probably, if I was forced to give a star rating, go 4.5, and 4.5 mainly because of that Slaughter bump. Because I still can't quite believe it happened.
Yeah, the timing was amazing, and they told a clear, concise story. So, I know in the Flair race story, in that match, the story was kind of convoluted. Race didn't seem at all interested. Sometimes they would sort of transition between wrestling, working hold for hold, and driving each other into the cage. Here you had 2 clear paths where, one team was going to wrestle to the victory, one team was going to ram Steamboat and Youngblood into the cage for the victory and kind of wheel their way. So they did tell a great story, and the second half I thought was, amazing. The final 20 minutes, I do think if you would have chopped the first portion in half and had a little better finish, it would have been more satisfactory for me.
Yeah. So would you go along with my 4.5 star rating? Or
yeah, if I had to give a star rating, I would say 4.5. Again, great match. It's just, as far as being one of the best matches of the 80s, I wouldn't go that far.
It is rare to see all 4 guys so messy and bloody, though. I will say that. Especially
yes, it did. It did sort of seem like kind of a War Games before War Games situation where, everybody looked worse for wear at the end of the match.
So just finishing up then. Before we do the kind of awards, there was a Flair versus Valentine match on this card.
Yeah,
didn't make it. Yeah. 60-minute time limit draw.
That seems interesting that they would do that. I guess that went on before cage match.
This was the main event, right?
Yes. This, I assume they did the thing where they had Flair Valentine, and Miller talks about how there'll be 2 intermissions. So I assume after that match they took the second intermission to set up the cage, and then had this match.
And fair play to the crowd. They're not dead after that 60-minute match. So
yeah, I'd be interested to see. I know Valentine is somebody. I know I said in the past podcast I ranked him as my MVP, and I thought he was great in the Piper match. And really, the only performance I could find comparable to his in that match was when he faced Bob Backlund in a 60-minute draw from 1979. I don't know if you ever seen that match, but that's a great 60-minute draw So I would have loved to have seen what him and Flair would have done here, especially since Flair has some history with Johnny Valentine. But unfortunately, I guess that it wasn't taped.
Well, Valentine, it takes him at least 15 minutes to get going.
Indeed it does, Gorilla.
All right, so we're saying MVP for the show. Obviously, match of the night is obvious. It's the main event. And I'm saying the MVP is probably Slaughter, right? I mean, he just does so much in this match.
Yeah, I would give Slaughter the edge. I mean, a kind of honorable mention to Kernerdle, because like you said, I doubt he's ever had a match near as good as this one. And he sort of rose to the occasion. I would say he was probably the fourth member in the matchup there, but he did a really good job. Even though I disagreed with sort of the story they were going with, he did take a good beating the first 15 minutes of the match. But Slaughter was incredible. One thing that I didn't mention during the match, but they do a kind of close-up shot of Slaughter on the apron while Kernerdle was beat on, and he has just this look of demeanor, and David, on cue talks about how he's strategizing what he's going to do when he gets in there, and that was just so appropriate. And so, I mean, he was just great at bumping, great offense when he dished it out, and I thought he was really great in that match.
Given that we're not going to see Slaughter again, I don't think we see Slaughter again. In all.
Yeah, I thought period, right?
Yeah,
never.
I think this is it for him, unless we do any AWA stuff.
Right.
These pods, but as far as NWA, this is it for him. I will mention that his face is quite unique. I mean, he's got the biggest chin. Like, if you got a cartoonist to draw a sergeant from the army, they'd come up with Slaughter's face. Like, he's got quite interesting facial features, Yeah,
I mean, he's got a great look, and it's not. I don't want to turn these podcasts into a harping of the current times, because I know why you don't keep up with current wrestling. I actually do, and I do find a lot of good still in the current product. But I mean, Slaughter is somebody that you just know would not get a second look today with his figure and his face, and even in this match he had sort of a receding hairline, and I mean, and he was excellent in this match.
In '83, I mean, Slaughter probably legit top 3 in the country, top 3 in the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be tough. I can't think of too many when you put in the Backlund title defenses, this match, and then the boot camp match, which has to be in sort of that 2 to 3 year window, without seeing some of the AWA stuff that we've got coming up. He's definitely a top tier contender. Yeah, because those are some of the best matches.
I don't just mean from like a matches point of view. I mean in terms of like being a star and a draw as well. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, here he drew the boot camp match. He drew his matches with Backlund. I've seen one from the Spectrum, one from MSG. They were both very heated and contested. So
I can't think of too many people who would have been ahead of him in '83. Maybe Hogan, maybe Flair, maybe Dusty. I mean, he's definitely top 5.
Absolutely. And so versatile. I mean, just think about all the different places he went and excelled at. I mean, really with different opponents. I mean, Iron Sheik and Steamboat and Bob Backlund are pretty 3 different sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, and
to have 3 great matches with.
Equally great as a face or a heel as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, Slaughter's awesome.
So how about our worst person on the night?
That could be pretty tough. I would say maybe Johnny Weaver. I don't know. Like I said, I really thought he was pretty good in the match we saw from Starrcade, which that wasn't much either, but he showed some decent moves and some stuff. I might actually say Gene Anderson. It's just I didn't know how far removed he was here. But yeah, Johnny Weaver, after seeing that, in November when they announced this matchup. And, Jim Nelson, I've seen him have some decent matches every once in a while. I thought this might be a pretty, decent to good little tag match in the middle of the card, and that was not there, and Weaver really brought nothing to the table.
I'm going to give that to Sandy Scott.
Sandy's a good contender. I think in retrospect, watching Knitsky's performance actually helped Sandy here because I was not near as appalled, but he was, especially at the ending. I mean, I can understand in sometimes trying to create a sense of control in the early going of the match, but I mean, all four guys have been in the ring for such an extended point of time for him to decide right then and there that Slaughter had to, leave the ring and go on the apron was pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, and just before we go, I'm going to have to give one last honourable mention to David Crockett, because honestly, I don't think we're going to, unless he crops up on some clashes, I don't think we're going to see him again.
Yeah, and like his call of the Youngblood Steamboat Kernerdle Slaughter match. I mean, Caudle did a great job calling the action, being straight, getting over the story, but Crockett added the enthusiasm. Just a great color job. I mean, he literally did bring a lot of color to that match and really livened it up.
Yeah, and he is just there's no other way to describe it, but he's a total lunatic. He's just...
Yeah, I mean, he's enthusiastic, but I do think there's sort of a fine line between enthusiastic and annoying, yeah. And he really towed that line great here. I mean, he did sound like a fan, a very educated fan in the main event, but it wasn't just, you don't get a sense of just an annoying, shill for the company. I mean, he really does seem like he's having the time of his life watching this match.
And this is going to sound like a knock on Soli, but I really think Caudle is a lot better without him. Like, even in the early matches where he was on his own. I
think Caudle just plays well off of someone. I mean, I know here with David, with the Smoky Mountain footage I've seen playing off of Dutch Mantell, and with Soli, it just, with both of them sort of calling it straight, and none of them really being a designated color person per se, it kind of muddles both of their performances.
Yeah, you're right, and we'll that will be a continuing theme on the next show, as we'll say. Well, thanks a lot, Chad, for yet again, and we'll see you soon for Starrcade 84.
I look forward to it.
Thanks a lot.
Fans, for all of us here at WCW at Center Stage, for Cowboy Bill Watts and the American Dream Dusty Rhodes, I'm Jim Ross saying good night, everybody.